Okay, hello. I want to show you today how to do data extraction with the PPM tool from Web Methods and Software AG. And so here we have a database. This is a dummy database from our training. And it just has a little bit of data, but it's a good way to show you how the data extraction works with the customizing toolkit from PPM. The nice thing about everything in the customizing toolkit is that we're trying to make it easy for you to do something powerful that you would normally only do with code just by clicking. And the JDBC extractor or our database extractor is the same way. So we can actually here do a SQL query against this database without needing any sort of coding ability. So, but we do need to understand our data structure. So what I want to show you really quickly here is my test database. And so what I have here is a couple of tables. I have a work item table. I have a workflow table. And so my workflow table is really, really simple. My workflow table just has order IDs and activities. So it just basically defines which activity come in what sequence. Then I have my work item table. My work item table has a little more information. It has the actual information of the step, a start time and end time, who performed it, what type of activity it was, and then we have an activity ID and of course an order ID. Then we have a bit more data about the activities themselves. So here we have to the activity type, we have the actual name. And then we also have a change document. And the change document here just has some data where some activities there has been some change. So we see here a new value, what has been changed, and we see the type of change. And then here we see the activity ID and the order ID. So this is the very, very basic data structure. And so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go into the CTK, I'm going to extract this data so that at the end of it, we can take this data and import it into PPM. So let me show you how to do this. So for this, I'm going to pull up my customizing toolkit. And so let's start from the beginning here. So in my customizing toolkit, I've created a client called train. And so this is the client that I'm going to be working with for this video. And if I go into this client, I have data source management. And so what I do here, I create a new connection to this particular database. And so here I have to give this data source a name. So I'm going to call it workflow. And this is, of course, a JDBC data source. So we have different types of data sources depending on what we want to, where we want to extract data from. And so here we're going to choose the JDBC data source. Now what I need to do, I need to provide the connection of my database. And I have a little cheat sheet here where I can take a look at my data. And so here I have a username that is called UMG data. I have the password that is also called UMG data. And I also need to provide the URL to the database. And I'm going to do this simply by peeking here in my previous data source and putting this in. So one thing that's really important here is that you select the right database type. PPM will pull the correct JDBC driver. So here we have different JDBC drivers. So this also comes usually automatic by selecting the database type. It pulls the right JDBC driver. You do need to make sure that you have that JDBC driver installed. Let me show you where you can find this. So here in your folder structure of your installation of PPM, you have inside the data PPM folder, there's a drivers folder, and you can see here I have a MS SQL driver installed here, version 4. This is the one that fits together with the Java version that we're using. So you can have several connections to several different types of databases. You just need to make sure that you have the right JDBC driver here provided. That's all you got to do. Throw it in here and then you're good. All right. Once you've provided this information, you should definitely test your connection. So you do this by clicking on here and then you should get a little OK. If you don't get an OK, you can click on this little icon here and it'll show you the error message. And normally you can see by the error message what your problem is. You might have a problem with the JDBC driver. You might have a problem with the credentials. Sometimes we also have just a certain way that the URLs need to be formatted in order for your particular database to understand them. So don't always trust the examples that the CTK provides you here. Do research on your particular JDBC driver and your particular database to make sure you have the right URL provided here. Okay, so that's it. So now we've set up the connection to our database. What we can do now is actually go into the process merge. This is basically the module inside the CTK where we are building the process together, including the data extraction. So the data extraction is part of the process merge module. Of course, I need to save. So we will go here. And what I am going to do now, I'm going to go into my data source. So I have the different data sources here, and I can now go to the particular data source that I want to configure. The very first thing when we have a database we need to do is we need to connect to our particular tables that we want to work with. You need to first register the tables that you want to work with. So you do this here by clicking on this little button and which says add tables from source system. And so here already it connects to my schema automatically. But you could also connect to a different schema. And I'm just going to be very lazy and star search here. Now again, this is a very basic database, so we only have 4 tables and we're going to use them all. But in the future, when you connect to a real production system, you probably are going to have hundreds of tables. So then it makes sense to put in the names of the tables that you want to look for. Anyway, you can select them all and press OK, and then they show up here. Really nice thing about the JDBC extractor is also that you will see the database structure. You cannot look into the data. If you really want to do data analysis, you need to use some sort of database query tool, but you get some basic information, especially what is the data structure of your table. So you will see the keys in the source system, and you will see the column names that the tables have. That's pretty much it, but usually that's already pretty good to get a high, rough overview of what these tables are all about. So now what we are going to do, we are going to create a source system event. And so this is really where a key kind of change from going to an object-oriented model to a process-oriented model happens. Because the difference on how data is stored in PPM versus a normal object-oriented database is that we are object-oriented versus process-oriented. In PPM, we are process-oriented. So what that means is we need to combine all the relevant data for a particular process steps. And that usually means we need to combine data from various objects in a table in an object-oriented data model. So this is a good example. What we want to do here is we want to have a process step for every workflow step of the process. So what we're going to do, we're going to define our system event, our event that is going to make up a process step. We're going to define that as kind of this activity in our workflow system. So what we're going to start with, we're going to start here with the workflow, because this is what the workflow defines. The workflow defines which activities follows which activity. So very simple. When we go in here, we just select the table that we want to use. And so here we use the table workflow. We have a choice to rename it, but I'm not going to do that. And normally we don't need to select anything else here. Now the next field is, it's asking us what are the key fields. And this is really important to understand what this does. This is basically now defining what an event is, because for every unique version of the combination of these particular fields, that is what is going to make up a system event. So every time we have a unique combination of order ID, activity type, and previous activity, that is what is going to make up an event. And so we define that right now. So that's it. This is our event. We could normally also choose what other fields to extract, but this table is so boring, it only has these 3 fields, so there's no other fields that we can extract. The next step is we can specify description. So if you have fields in this database that has IDs and not the description, you can pull up the description from other tables here. We don't have this in this case, but this is in general the functionality of this thing here. And we also can identify some filters. In this particular case, I'm not going to do any filters. If you want to learn more how these filter operations work, just look at the help here. These operators are defined pretty well. Okay, so we can just say finish, and also the parameters at the end. This is also something you normally don't have to define. So we can just say finish, and now we've identified our system event. What I want to do now, I want to join all this other data to the system event. So we don't actually have any meat, we just define basically the core of what makes up an event. Basically every activity of an order becomes an event, and so for every activity will become a function step later on in our process. So what we're going to do now, we're going to add these other things. So let's start with the work item. The work item, again, I have the choice here to change the name, but work item I like, so I'm just going to leave it. And so what the system is asking me now, we have this table. Which of the fields do you actually want to extract? So you do not need to extract all of the fields, you have a choice. But here, of course, with this simple table, we do need to extract everything. So I'm just going to extract everything. And again, the same thing with the description. If I just had some descriptions, I could actually do this. So for instance, here, when it comes to the activity type, I actually have a choice to extract the activity type via this little method here. I could now go to the activities table. I could go to the activities field. This is my ID. And then here is my description name. And I could also use a language field. This, in some tables, we have language fields in case there is the name described in different languages. We could also just not worry about this. So this is one way we could describe this, and I'm just going to do it in order to demonstrate how this works to you. And so now the last step that we need to do is we need to specify the foreign key relation. So what we need to do is we need to basically say, well, we want to join the records together via the order ID and the activity ID. So we're basically just hooking up all of the corresponding information from this table to the previously extracted system event. And of course, we also have the choice to select a condition or a filter. But here, we're not going to do that, so we're not going to worry about it. All of these things can also be adjusted later on. So you can right-click on any one of these and you can edit it. You can do the same thing here. And notice you also have access to the source system events, the extract conditions, as well as the filters that you want to select. So if you click on here, you simply get back into the wizard here, and then you can do what you maybe have forgotten before. So now we need to do this a couple more times, add all the information from the other table. So we have added the workflow item. I'm just going to show you how it would work if you would take this activity name by simply joining another table to your existing table, and that's usually what I do. And then what you can say, you can just extract those fields. Again, here we don't have a description, and then you just got to make sure that the right fields are connected in your foreign key relationship. So here you have the work item, activity type, and then that's it. That's all you're going to connect to. So you then basically are going to read the activity name into it, depending on what activity type we have in the work item table. And then we can just click through. Again, there's not going to be any filter. Yeah, and so only one more table is missing right now here, and that would be the change document. Again, I'm going to leave everything the way it is. I'm going to want to extract all of the fields. I could omit the order ID or the activity type to save, data or something like that. But in general, I don't mind having some extra fields. It's better to have data than to not have it. And so here I'm going to again connect these tables. I have the order ID, and what I'm going to use is the workflow order ID and also the workflow activity ID. I could also use these order ID or activity IDs now for my work item table. It doesn't really matter since they're both the same. And I'm going to get these two new data fields, the value new and the key, in addition to that. Also, of course, no filters or other parameters. So I'm just going to go through here. And so now I'm done. So what I've created here now is something that normally you would hack together in a SQL query. But here you have this JDBC extractor that allows you to just kind of click things together, and it's much easier to create your extraction this way. And so now that we've defined this extraction, what we can do now is go back to our client. And because as soon as we've created a new data source, we should also now have a program automatically that lets us extract data from this particular data source. So you see here, extract data from data source workflow. I can double click on this program, and then this program will execute. Because the data is so little, you can see now altogether we have extracted 12 events, system events. And so we've combined all this data together in 12 system events. Okie dokie. So now let's take a look at this data real quick. So I'm going to go to my folder structure here, and I'm going to just check out this data. And so here in my train, I can see the data folder, and in here I have my workflow folder for my particular data source. And in here I have this file that we have extracted. Now, if we take a look at this file, we always get metadata in the beginning. That will define all the particular data types that can appear in the particular events. And then we see every event, and you can see here how things have been nicely joined together. All the data from the different tables have been joined together into one particular event. And so we see here just a list of events. And yeah, this is why this file is also called an event list. And so every event is represented here in an XML file. Yeah, so this is how the data extraction works with a database. When you use a different database, a different data source, the end result should look the same. All of our extractors produce events, these event lists with events, and this should all look the same. And so once we have this, you can start your data import into PPM, which we will cover in another video.